Hey, before we jump in, I want to give you a quick word about the partner that's making this summer series possible, and that's NextGrad. If you're in higher ed marketing, you already know the challenge. Students are getting bombarded with college messages every single day, and most of it just blends together. NextGrad takes a different approach. Instead of fighting for the attention online, they put your institution's message right inside the high school, the place where students actually are day in and day out. They're in more than 2,500 schools across North America, which means your future students might be walking past a Next screen right now. Hey, I've been following NextGrad for several years, and I love what they're doing. I think it's extremely creative. I've actually been able to work on some of the creative with my clients to get in front of the students, and it's making a big difference. And I got to say, I'm a big fan of these folks. If you want to be the institution they remember when it's time to decide, go check them out right now at nextgrad.com. NextGrad, where students see you first. Hey, welcome to the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast. I'm Bart Kaler, your host, and today's guest is Derek Riordan. He's digital marketing strategist at Southeast Missouri State University in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. I really have enjoyed this conversation. And you know, his connection to SEMO runs a lot deeper than just his job title. He's actually an honors graduate of the university with a bachelor's degree in corporate communication and a minor in entrepreneurship. And just love his story. He goes into a lot deeper in the podcast, and I think you'll find it fascinating to hear how he ended up there and what he's doing and how they supported him in his journey. But SEMO is a public university of roughly about 9,000 students, founded back in 1873. Derek is the founder of Riordanology Creative, an agency focused on copywriting, branding, and design. So really excited to bring this conversation with you today. So let's get started. Well, Derek, I am so excited to have you on the program today. I'm so grateful that you're here, but I always start with one question with our guests, and it's always the same. What's something you've learned recently that might be interesting or funny that you'd like to share with our audience?
So something interesting that I've learned is that universities in higher education need to be based in trust, because right now there's a lot of uncertainty. And with all this new technology coming out, like AI, the search journey is changing quite significantly. So we really need to be intentional with doubling down and being about what we're messaging these students.
I love that. And I was talking to my team recently that I said, you know, we're not selling services or products, we're selling trust. And I think it's the same thing for institutions, is you've got to start with that. So I love that. So we've got so much to talk about today. I'm really grateful that you're here. And one of the things I want to talk a little bit about, you kind of talked about trust, but I think that you also have to, in that trust, it comes through your brand influence. And so many times I think that people forget that planting that early flag of brand influence before you start asking for application and the tactical elements. And so help me understand that, you know, you're marketing a campus you walked on as a student. So you're an alum of your institution. So how does your own path to Southeast Missouri State shape the way you think about that first impression for the future students?
So my own path myself was not perfectly linear. I'm technically a non-traditional student. I spent a little time in the Air Force. So a big part of what I do now, marketing the university, is I like to try to help potential prospective students fill in the gap and basically understand where they fit in, what they can afford, and whether they are capable of actually taking the next step and truly building trust. Kind of back to what we were talking about earlier. Trust is the fundamental of everything. You need, ROI, you need outcomes, and they all need to be based in data.
Yeah. But I love the fact that you keep going back to trust, because I'm 100% there with you. And I think that trust starts real early. I mean, I remember when my kids were in high school, and even at the freshman and sophomore year, they were already starting to talk about schools, or they would recognize schools, or maybe they had a band camp or a sports camp on an institution. And so that trust starts really early. But I think that's also the idea of, I know you thinking a lot about how does the brand influence younger students. How are you building that trust earlier and earlier? So what does that early brand influence actually look like from your perspective?
From my perspective, it's meeting the students where they're at. And there's a plethora of ways that you can do that, especially in today's with all the technology that we have.
Right.
In particular, you need to be on social media platforms,
Yeah.
Paid and organically. You need to be reaching these students, and you need to capture their attention and start that influence as early as possible. And that also coexists with traditional marketing like billboards, being locally involved in your community, doing events, hosting events. Everything works together in a cohesive manner. The way I like to think about it is we talk a lot about like attribution, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there could be some kid driving down the highway and they see a SEMO billboard.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, show me you're fearless. And then later down the road that day, I geofenced their community, and now they're getting ads on their timeline. And they're like, hey, I actually remember seeing that billboard.
Yeah.
Now I'm a little bit more invested, and I can develop more understanding of what this university has to offer through storytelling.
Yeah, I like that because, you're using that storytelling and you're doing it locally because I know you've got I think this fall you're up 10% in your local region, which is incredible. I think that's really exciting. So, what else are you working on? Everybody is maybe a lot of people are doing digital. I know a lot of people are doing digital. Mm-hmm. Some people are doing billboards. Some people are doing other things. What are some of the other things that you're doing that you're finding success with as well?
Yeah, a multitude of things. I think number one, it definitely falls down to leadership and kind of the decisions that are being made from like an executive mindset. Yeah. And then also we are doing things that are kind of new, like NextGrad, where there's actually these kiosks in schools. So again, we were talking earlier about that early brand exposure and how these things work together, being on a digital platform as well, serving ads. And then also something that we've been really intentional with being focused on is looking at the funnel and know when to push what events. So in the spring, we are looking to create a warm audience and basically generate leads and visits for fall. Whenever the application opens, we're going to push for apply. So those are the things that we're doing. A big thing that we really want to focus on is our visit campaigns. And that's because statistically, if someone comes and actually visits the campus, they're going to be more likely to actually end up being enrolled.
Yeah. I love that. Say that louder for the people in the back, because I'm a big proponent of that. And not only your statistics, but most school statistics and just nationwide statistics show if you can get a family on campus, if you can get a student on campus, the chance that you're going to close that family is so much greater than if they're not on. So I love the fact that you guys are really pushing those different campaigns. And I love the fact that you as a digital marketing strategist are really kind of focused on using those NextGrad billboards in a very strategic way, that you're actually lining up your messaging to the right time of the year. So love that. That's really good. I appreciate you sharing that, Derek. So let me kind of shift gears a little bit, because I know that we talked about this idea of college discovery. I love the example you gave was maybe they see it on the billboard, then they go geofence, and then they go to school the next morning, and so you've got all these different ways that they're engaging with it. So, but one of the numbers that really stopped me was that 46% of students are now using AI tools like ChatGPT in their college search. And so that's doubled from just a year ago. And I know that 46% might even be low now from earlier this year, because AI is changing everything. And you kind of mentioned that earlier. So when did this shift get real for you at SEMO? Because as the digital marketing strategist, you're in charge of doing some of the SEO and some of the paid media. What are you doing to stay ahead of all that?
Yeah, so 100%. This is one thing that I will give complete credit to my team. I'm going to shout out Emma Brown. She is our actually SEO strategist. And from the start of AIO, she has been all over basically producing content that is optimized for SEO and creating blogs, because if you don't know, those AIOs are pulling from content. Yep. And a lot of it is if the content is structured good and it's optimized for SEO. And that way we're basically just creating content so we can continuously stay relevant. We're constantly giving that AI content to pull from.
Yeah, I really like the fact that you really talked about, AI is not pulling it from keywords like in the old days. I think a lot of people still think, oh, I've got the right keywords. It's thinking through everything, and it's almost trying to approach it and then give an answer back. And so that's why they call it answer engine optimization, because these tools are doing that. And so I know that students, in addition to using AI more, they're actually making decisions on even to look at schools based on AI. And then I think one of the things that they also do is they're talking to their AI. They're spending a lot more time wanting to know about budget and major and campus vibe and career outcomes all in one big conversation. So they might just have, this huge long conversation. So how does that change? I mean, you talked about the blogs, but what are other things that you're doing to think through how do we get the right kind of content out there that these tools can really start harvesting that content? I think you kind of mentioned that earlier.
Yeah. So some of the things that we are doing is looking at Google Trends and trying to capture those trends to basically understand what the student is searching for. That way we can curate that content that resonates with them. And as they query these AIs, their questions can be very, very hyper specific. So with that being said, we have to be hyper specific on what we're offering, and that has to be significantly clear.
Yeah, I like that. And I know that one of the ways a lot of schools are looking at that too is also in long form video, because when you do that long form video and you're very specific in that, and then you've got, a transcript that goes into those details, that makes a really big difference too. So speaking of AI, and I know a lot of schools are struggling with this because students say they can spot AI generated outreach a mile away. I mean, so, because they can smell it. They've got these AI sensors. I don't know what it is, but so how are you kind of, you're building that creative content for a living. You're using AI tools as all of us are, but where do you draw the line between using AI as a tool and then, possibly losing the human voice that the students actually trust, going back to that word we talked about earlier?
Yeah, I always like to frame it like AI can help me work faster. But it cannot tell a story that only a real advisor can. So I think that we need to be really intentional with how we're using AI, and we should look at it as a tool to free up our time so we can further build and nurture the relationship with the prospective students we're trying to reach.
I love that. Derek, you and I have just met for the first time, and you and I are symbiotic on all this stuff, because I love what you're saying there, because I'm a firm believer that human is the way we need to approach AI. And if you're just, putting something in and then copying and pasting it into a Conflow, you're going to get burned, and that you're going to have a hard time with that. So love what you're doing with that. That's great. So all this stuff that we're talking about with the brand at the beginning, using AI, and this brand messaging that we're doing, how are you going to be tying that to your outcomes and your ROI? You mentioned ROI at the very beginning. And so I know that families are a lot more skeptical than ever on whether a degree is worth the investment. So, a lot of them are even, is college worth it? And when you sit down to build a campaign, how are you moving from this message of look at our beautiful campus and what we're doing to here's the return on your family's investment? Because I think that's what people are really looking for.
Yeah, 100%. I think that you need to be very clear in what messages you're sending to prospective students and what messages you are sending to their parents. They need to be two separate things, because you're talking to two different demographics, essentially. With that being said, your ROIs and outcomes need to be based in data.
Yeah.
So one thing that I think SEMO does really well is our institutional research department. They have all these data-based outcomes that we can actually use within our marketing campaigns, and we use those outcomes to basically curate messages to these families, because let's be honest, parents most of the time are the ones who are going to be paying the tuition. Right. We also have been very intentional with the content and actually the story that we're telling these parents. We kind of started something new here recently to where we are actually getting employers to give testimonies about working with our SEMO graduates. And that inherently gives us a natural social authority. And we even get so intentional to reaching out to each major employer in a specific region and geofencing that region just so the people in that area know of that company and they appreciate and see the value that SEMO has to offer.
I love that. And I love the fact that you are taking the data, you're turning that into stories that are going to resonate with your different audiences, the students, the parents. You're using alumni and social proof from the employers to weave that all in. I think that's great. And I know that's making a big difference on both the affordability messaging and the workforce impact for your region. One thing I've got, because I'm going to also throw out, I think there's a third audience that we've talked about, but I think it's worth including into this message is that, you got parents, you got students, but you've also got AI, because we talked about that in a second. So how are you creating these outcome stories that are going to be really genuinely human, but also going to be machine readable? You talked earlier about, the schemas and things like that, but I think even just having really good stories impacts AI as well. Maybe speak to that.
So we should talk about the outcomes, but we shouldn't not reduce the students to numbers. The numbers matter, but the story behind the numbers is what makes people believe them. However, again, when we were talking about like making content that is readable to these machines, I think what goes into that a lot of times is how the content is structured.
Yeah.
So, you can have a good story, but you just need to be really intentional with putting SEO into that story and basically optimizing it to that schema without taking away from the overall story of what you are trying to articulate.
Yeah, I love that. Some of the things that we've done in our services is like frequently asked questions at the bottom of a story, or maybe even some pull quotes or facts pulled out, and you wrap some code around that. And I think it gets to be really strong. And so, man, this has been such a good conversation. I've got one last question here, and I know that this gets back to the very first thing you talked about was trust, and this idea that I think there's a big gap sometimes for colleges and universities between the promise that their marketing is making and then what the students actually experience. And so what's your role in closing that? I mean, if you're talking to other marketers, it's like, how do you go from that big promise that's on the billboards that we talked about to what they're living out in the dorms, that at the end of the day, they're like, yeah, this is what I was sold.
Right. I would say authenticity is key here. And, we talked about my journey of going to college here as an undergrad and how I was non-traditional. One thing that people don't know about me is at the time I was a young father. And one of SEMO's things that was sold, or one of SEMO's core values that was sold to me is that you are boldly supported. And I truly felt that through my professors there. And with that being said, they supported me throughout this whole journey, and they basically showed me that, hey, you can achieve this because we're here to help you and we're in your corner. So I think it's with connecting stories like that, and again, how I mentioned, you got to walk the talk. So these messages that you're sending out to these prospective students, it needs to align with what your institution is doing. Because if it doesn't, they're going to get there, and then you're not going to be able to retain these students.
I love that because, I mean, fake it till you make it works in some things, but it certainly doesn't work in university marketing. So I really appreciate that, Derek. So I really have enjoyed our conversation, and I know at the end we always ask for kind of a tip, or so for a marketing or enrollment leader that's listening today, what's one step that they can take to better connect early brand influence, or maybe AI driven search or student outcomes into their strategy? What's one thing that you would say, hey, if you're going to walk away and do one thing from our conversation today, here's what I would tell you to do?
I would tell you to get on CTV. And also, maybe look in the NextGrad, because that early brand exposure is invaluable, especially if you have a digital paid media strategy where you're on multiple platforms. Attribution works together. So that's my biggest takeaway, or my biggest line of advice is you got to start as early as possible.
Love that. Love that. Derek, thanks so much for being on the show today. What's a way that somebody could get in touch with you? I know a lot of times people are like, man, loved what Derek said. How can I get in touch with him? What would they do?
Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is Derek Riordan. And you can also connect with me through my website, which is riordanologycreative.com.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for being on the show today, Derek. It's been such a pleasure to have you here.
Yes, I appreciate you too. Thank you for having me on.
Hey, thanks for joining for another episode of the Higher Ed Marketer podcast. And special thanks to our friends over at NextGrad. First impressions matter. Make sure you're making yours where it counts most. Visit nextgrad.com to learn more. NextGrad, where students see you first. If you found the conversation helpful, please share it with a colleague and join us on LinkedIn at the Higher Ed Marketer. This podcast is powered by Kaler Solutions, your trusted partner in mission fit marketing. We'll see you next week with another great guest.
The Higher Ed Marketer podcast is proud to be a part of the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast Network. Discover even more conversations, resources, and tools to help you grow your institution at thehigheredmarketer.com, your go-to community for all things higher ed marketing and leadership.